Our group's topic is cross-cultural experiences for the international student. We're choosing this topic to talk about several major differences between Chinese international students and local students. I'm the first narrator, and my subtopic is plagiarism and misconduct. On the fourth week, I learned about the basic concepts and the requirements for citation and rewrite. I have to admit that there are quite a lot of differences between Chinese sense of plagiarism and how Americans define plagiarism. This time, I want to talk about this situation and figure out what we can do about it. In the first part, I want to introduce the concept of plagiarism and how do students make mistakes. Mr. Rapkin told us, after posting the passage underlining the importance of plagiarism, one of his students told him he used a plagiarized essay once. However, the student figured directly using sentences from another source without citation was right. And this is the 5 types of plagiarism. For the second part, I'd like to point out how Chinese students were taught in school and therefore explaining the misunderstood of plagiarism. As a Chinese student, I also made mistakes like on the second week arriving here when writing the procedure of Lab 2. I didn't cite the procedure in the manual book correctly. However, attending the 1901 course makes me have a clearer view of misconduct. Chinese students may make mistakes like that because they were taught differently in high school. As an international student, I also hate the disrespectfulness towards the original author, but I also believe that most students did not make this mistake intentionally. Introducing classes like 1901 is really good. Classes like that teach students how to behave correctly. Also, Chinese schools should also strive to make students aware of plagiarism. They should use the software like Turnitin too.
Why international students face cultural shock? Because the differences between cultures, it is very common for international students to have some stress when they first come to a new environment. To some extent, they may come up with many difficulties outside of their expectations. According to an article presented in 2015 by University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign Student Affairs at Illinois, international students may face these factors in change laws, value differences, expectations, social skills, host country receptivity. When international students first come to an unfamiliar environment, they may somewhat have a sense of loss. They live away from their family and friends, so they are forced to be independent. According to the article, even though some students are very active in their home countries, they may still find it hard to be successful in the US. Cultures are different from country to country. It is unavoidable to face some cultural shock, and the greater the differences between cultures, the more challenging the process of adaptation. If some students come out with discrimination, things would be even worse. What can international students do to cope with cultural shock? It is a tough process when dealing with cultural shock, but there are still some ways to help international students solve these problems. And here are some suggestions to help international students conquer cultural shock. According to UIUC Cross-Cultural Journey for International Students, Stages of Cultural Shock, there are a few tips for international students to cope with cultural adaptation. First, students need to be familiar with US's academic system. Students can turn to advisors and professors for help. They can also study with others, such as with friends or in study groups. Second, students should try to know more about American cultures via newspaper, native people, and etc. What's more, they can also seeking some hometown food or people who are willing to share and listen to their experience. That's a good way to relieve homesick and culture shock. But international students need to remember cultural adaptation needs some time and effort to cope with.
I will talk about the relationship and social life in the university. And there are four main topics for it. You can see first, the main relationship and social life in the university. First, there are various of relationship and social life in the university. For example, the relationship with friends, roommates, classmates, professors, teaching assistants, and room assistants. And for the social life, there are kinds of different clubs for different interests available for everyone. And next, the difference between the high school and the university. I will talk about from the classroom, from the dorm. First, the high school classrooms, students and their settled classmates and the settled class numbers, so they meet their same classmates every day. They can be very familiar with others. By contrast, in the university, students and no settled classmates, they even can remember their faces. About the difficulty to adapt in the new social life, I think the main problem is the language problems, because even though the students have passed the language exams such as TOEFL, it doesn't mean all students have the ability to express their thinking friendly and listen to the local speakers' opinions clearly. And I would say there is a scenario. Your roommate said to you, "Could you please hook up the computer for me?" You may think about what means of hookup. You only know the meaning of hook and up, so you finally hook the computer up and get an angry response. What the hell are you doing? So the language problem is a huge obstacle for social life and social communication. Finally, I will give you some tips for these difficulties. First, do not afraid to start conversation with local people, even though you already know your ways of expression is not correct, because you can learn from the conversation. Second, spend your time on learning social skills. You're supposed to learning their culture and what they should say and what they shouldn't say. Then be prepared to feel overwhelming. You will find huge difficulty during the learning English time, but you have to know it and get it. Finally, be more and more confident.
When students start their college experience in the US, especially for international students, they will encounter numerous challenges and experience a period of adjustment. The primary reason of the extended time of transition for international students is culture shock. Culture shock covers many different aspects, and the difference in academic and classroom life, including the behaviors of students, style of dressing, and the teaching style, is very important. There is an informality of the US college classroom that some, including professors, would interpret as bordering on disrespect. Take my own experience for example. There was one time during my German culture class, one of my classmates who is a Native American ate chips and couldn't stop making the sound of chewing. However, no one, including the professor, asked him to stop eating or made any suggestions to him. For an Asian student, one surprise was how often students interrupt the professor in the middle of lecture to ask their own questions. This would not be tolerated in his country. Talk about the dressing style. The style is free, and it seems the native college student doesn't pay too much attention on their appearance. Let's move on to the teaching style. Take my own experience for instance. One of my professors always sits on the platform or sits in the center of us when she asks us to make a circle, instead of standing in front of students, which is the only allowed gesture of teachers and the only thing could happen during class in my country. Although the transition for our international students is more tough than the other freshmen, We have to deal with all the situations caused from culture shock and make adjustment in a positive way as soon as possible. So in the end, that's all the content of our group project. I'm Meredith. Thanks for watching.